710 KURV Talkback. Dr. Lawrence Gelman, home of the iron microphone. Scientific conservatism. It's not preaching to the choir, but teaching the choir how to sing. We're here after the New Year's and campaign going on. I was just talking to Fred a little earlier, a few seconds ago. Very painful whenever I have to do that. And I was, of course, promoting Ron Paul, the only true constitutionalist, the only true American running for president today. And but old Fred here says that that Ron Paul is naive on foreign policy. Why do you say that, Fred?
Because of his foreign policy. I agree. Why are we involved with everything? But when it comes to Iran, you got to take a stand and say, look, you guys are wackos. So
really? Are they not wackos in Pakistan also?
They're not as wacko. How's that?
You don't think Pakistan is as wacko as Iran?
No. They're not
How
calling...
about North Korea? Are they wackos in
Yes,
North Korea?
Those guys are wackos too.
Does North Korea have nuclear weapons?
Yes,
Are we going to do anything about it?
Yeah. Well, but that was a Clinton problem.
Are we going to do anything about it?
We should do something about it.
What do you want to do?
Go in there and say, hey, you guys are not the leaders here anymore. We are.
Really? That's what we did in Iraq. How well did that work out?
How did
that work out?
No, it didn't. That one did not work out. No.
No. What makes you think it's going to work out?
Because you need somebody to go in there. You need somebody to go in there who knows what they're going to be doing and do it. Not just say we're going to do this and all of a sudden, oh, we can't do that.
And what is the end point? What is the goal?
That you have a safer, secure world. You don't have some country with nuclear weapons threatening to wipe out another country, i.e. Israel.
What about China?
Well, that's a totally different story. Like, we can tell China, like, we don't owe you guys anything, all right? If you guys want to sell your garbage over here, when we don't owe you anything on tax bills or you guys lending us any more money. But you're not going to have anybody like that say that kind of stuff.
So then, isn't it counterproductive for us to go into these places where things just end up worse?
Not if we take care of business.
What kind of business you want to take care of in Iran?
You take out the people who are there. Not take out. That sounds bad. You remove the people who are there, and you put people who are pro-U.S., pro-freedom.
Isn't that what we try to do in Iraq? All right, that's enough, Fred. Obviously, nothing, right? It's just this brainwashing that goes on.
No, you're just upset because I'm not a Ron Paul supporter.
No, I'm disappointed. Because.
Well, it's not the first time I've disappointed you.
No, pretty much every Saturday.
Every Saturday, yeah.
But the thing is, is that if it's not Ron Paul, you're going to end up with Barack Obama or Mitt Romney. And what are they going to do? They're just going to continue on our path. But so this is what I'm up against here. Even within our own little KURV family, we have these people that are brainwashed. They're living, if you've read the book of George Orwell, 1984, it's people who become true believers, brainwashed, cannot see, cannot learn from history. So, but we'll try. We try. We do the best we can. We hope that there are others out there that will understand the message. The media is weak, and it exists only to indoctrinate. I was watching the Judge Napolitano show, and I like Judge Napolitano. I think his viewpoints are good. But to show you how weak your average commentator or news anchor or newsreader is, he had on John Sununu, ex-governor of New Jersey, who's a big Mitt Romney supporter. And before anything could be said just about John Sununu was attacking the libertarian viewpoints of Judge Napolitano, and besides that, he was defending Mitt Romney, saying that Mitt Romney, in his term as governor of Massachusetts between 2003 and 2007, that Mitt Romney had done what conservatives want from the president, which is to balance the budget, reduce the size of government, get rid of inefficiencies, consolidate agencies and all of that. And so John Sununu was giving a pro-Mitt Romney speech, and Judge Napolitano did nothing to refute that. And then they went on to another topic about the liberal judges or things such as that. And, of course, when that happens, when an assertion is made by, in this case, John Sununu, and there's no rebuttal, then it's assumed by the viewer that John Sununu is correct and is saying the truth, and it's a victory for Mitt Romney in that instance. However, I, without knowing the specifics, know that Mitt Romney is a big government Republican. There's no possible way he actually did any that John Sununu asserted. John Sununu is a big government Republican, supporter of George Bush. They're all elitists and statists. And so I knew instinctively that John Sununu was lying. Unfortunately, the Judge Napolitano did not seem to be prepared to contradict the assertions that Sununu was making. So I did something apparently these guys don't bother to do. I investigated the term of Romney as governor in Massachusetts from 2003-2007. And, of course, this is what I learned is the truth, and the truth is that none of the assertions that Sununu was making were accurate. The budget under Romney went up 22% in his term, from $28 billion to $33 billion in the state of Massachusetts. And though it is true that the state budget was balanced, and it is true that the income tax rate was not increased in Massachusetts, however, the truth is this, that Romney increased fees and everything. He increased fees on gasoline, on all licensing, on starting up of businesses, on businesses itself. He increased fees to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. Much of the aid to individual municipalities was cut to the cities and municipalities, so that the municipalities, now getting less money from the state, had to increase their taxes through whatever taxes they had, their fees. Property taxes went up 5% in Massachusetts. And so as a citizen of Massachusetts, it makes little difference to me if I'm paying more money to the state or more money to the city and county. It only matters to me that I'm paying more money. So John Sununu, Mitt Romney increased the taxes directly or indirectly, not the state tax, but other taxes and fees to all the citizens of Massachusetts. He increased the budget by 22%. He reduced services at the same time and implemented a nationalized style of health care, which is in the red billions of dollars and has greatly negatively affected the functioning of the hospital system in Massachusetts. So the effect of Romney in Massachusetts is going to be exactly the same he will do as president, which is that he will be incapable of getting the situation under control because he doesn't have constitutional principles forming the basis of his philosophy. And so that is the problem in our media today. There's no information, no accurate information being put out there. It is only on programs like this that you're going to hear the truth and understand what's really going on. Now, there are numerous false premises in our national debate. The political debate in the United States is based upon false premises, and upon those false premises, solutions that are tried to be created. Of course, if your premises are false, there's no way that the solutions can work. Now, I'm going to give you a brief. We've discussed many of these on the program. I'm just going to go through a few of them again in a very concise manner. Now, first, The reason the nation is in a crisis, both on the home front and abroad, is not due to some unforeseen natural disaster. It is a direct consequence of our deviation from constitutional principles. Our deviation from those constitutional principles is concealed from us by the politicians, the media, and the system of public education. And they do so by propping up straw men and using false premises. For example, what is the false premise on Medicare and Medicaid? That they are economically unsustainable. This is a false premise. There's more than enough money expended in health care in the United States now to provide every American with excellent health care. Unfortunately, the intention of those managing Medicare and Medicaid is not to guarantee health care, but to remove the health care decision-making process from the citizen and place it into the hands of politicians and bureaucrats, who then divert billions of dollars away from appropriate health care providers and towards those providing unnecessary services or those vastly overcharging for services and products, guaranteeing huge profits to friends, relatives, cronies, and contributors to politicians. They say that Social Security is basically a Ponzi scheme. This is false. It only became a Ponzi scheme because the government has stolen trillions of dollars from the trust fund of Social Security. They say that the Federal Reserve exists to stabilize the economy. This is a false premise. The Federal Reserve exists to fund government agencies, departments, and its czars that intrude, enslave, and corrupt. It funds American political foreign adventurism to massage the egos of narcissistic politicians. The false premise, as Fred here has alluded to also, is that America would be endangered if it reduced its presence on the world stage. This is also false. 40 years of American intervention in the Middle East has been responsible for the handing over to anti-American, intolerant, despotic regimes the countries of Iran, Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Lebanon, Egypt, Syria, and Saudi Arabia, while it has simultaneously managed to destabilize the entire Middle East. American foreign policy is responsible for making communist China an economic, political, and military power. You have the false premise enunciated most recently by fascist Barack Obama that the free market is heartless and unfair, requiring government regulation. This is also false. The free market functions in response to the needs and wants of the population. Moreover, the transactions between producers and consumers are voluntary to the mutual benefit of all parties involved. On the other hand, the government produces little of value, achieving its transactions not through mutual agreement between parties, but through coercion and threat. Ron Paul speaks the truth. That is why Fred has such difficulty in understanding him. Once Ron Paul's free market views on the economy were derided by the experts. But now he receives the respect of even his former detractors, as his predictions concerning the abuses of the Federal Reserve, the collapse of the housing bubble, and the government-generated downturn in the economy have come to pass. So now the same naysaying experts characterize him as naive on foreign policy, a consequence of his non-interventionist approach. Our country was founded and sustained by those fleeing the tyrannies and bureaucracies of Europe and the rest of the world. Yet, our increasing involvement in the economies and political intrigues of Europe and other parts of the world threatens our American identity and runs counter to our founding fathers' admonition to avoid foreign entanglements. Ronald Reagan's foreign policy won the Cold War through example without firing a shot. How much treasure has been consumed and how many lives have been sacrificed upon this altar of political egotism. Government is a parasite that consumes the wealth of a nation, weakens and damages it, and even at times kills those who have the misfortune to live under its rule. For the government parasite to continue its existence requires the suspension of truth and the propagation of the great lie that government is benevolent. Those populating government spend all their time trying to justify their existence, but are as clueless in understanding the free market as ancient man would be attempting to understand a computer. Government is incapable of producing anything anyone would want, and therefore government must steal to exist and then justify the theft. There are things, however, for which government is required. Slavery can only exist under government. Genocide and war are the only commodities the government produces. Voters have been fooled into believing the government is the solution when, in fact, it is the problem, much to mankind's ultimate despair and misery. For a society to advance, what is required of government is to get out of the way. Ron Paul adheres to constitutional principles, rejecting the divine right of kings and replacing it with the natural rights of the individual. Ron Paul realizes, as did our founding fathers, the greatness of a nation dwells not in its government, but in the people. Power is a zero-sum equation. The more power the government has, the less freedom the people have. The less freedom the people have, the poorer the nation. Ron Paul's views on domestic and foreign policy are based upon constitutional principles. His opponents dare not attack the Constitution, so instead attack the man. In their attempts to denigrate Ron Paul, the media harps about electability, the same media which once declared Ronald Reagan non-electable. It's not the winning or losing of an election that counts, but principle. Could a Barack Obama have been elected after the Reagan presidency? Of course not. It required the presidency of the unprincipled George Bush, who betrayed conservative values and functioned as a big government Republican that set the stage for a Barack Obama win. A Mitt Romney presidency will result in a repeat of that disaster. Self-proclaimed conservatives, Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, and Mark Levin, by their assault on Ron Paul, are unmasked as self-serving hypocrites, acting as shills on behalf of establishment big government Republicans such as George Bush, Karl Rove, Newt Gingrich, and Mitt Romney. Ron Paul can win. There are 250 million potential voters in the United States. In the last election, 125 million Americans did not vote. The real winner of the last election was none of the above. Those who refuse to vote do not discern any difference between candidates. But now there is a clear distinction between one candidate and all the rest, whether Democrat or Republican. Only one presidential candidate honors constitutional principles and will get government out of the way and return peace and prosperity to the nation. Representative Ron Paul. We have Mark calling from McAllen. 7 at KRV. Thanks for calling. What's your comment?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate what you're saying and what you're doing. I'm also a Paul supporter.
Good.
And for many reasons and for a long time. One thing that I would like for you to do, have you ever seen the documentary called Fall of the Republic?
No.
I highly recommend that you go on YouTube.
Okay.
And research, or just look up Fall of the Republic. It's by Alex Jones. He's got a lot of documentaries.
Okay.
He's a longtime broadcaster out of Austin. He's got a huge listening audience and a lot more documentaries. But my comment is that the thing about Washington that a lot of people need to see is that basically it's been hijacked by globalist interests. And what they have our nation doing is continuing the same old what the British Empire was doing. In other words, America has become the bouncer of the European elites. In other words, our country, our taxpayers, we're doing all the dirty work in the world, and they're calling the shots.
Okay.
And I believe that Barack Obama and even George Bush, and going way back, our presidents have basically have been slaves to that old European system, that niche or that clique that's existed.
Right.
And they could bankrupt this country.
They already have.
In the process of doing that.
Well, we are bankrupt.
Yes.
When you're spending more than you're making, that's bankruptcy. Okay.
Yes.
No, I agree with all. Anything else?
Well, that Fall of the Republic, it pretty much does a very good job in outlining this cabal that exists in both. It's not just an American cabal. It has its tentacles, its feet over deep into Europe with the kings, the queens, the richest families in the world, the Paris Club, the Club of Rome. All these guys are definitely influencing a lot of the legislation that's coming down. A lot of the legislation that comes through Washington is coming directly from these, and it's got to be stopped, or they're going to destroy our sovereignty. They're going to change this country.
Right, they already have.
George Soros is right in the middle of all of it. So is Henry Kissinger. All these guys.
Sure. Okay. Well, good. Thanks for your comments. I want to get to the other call before we go to our break here. But thanks for calling. Now we have John, also calling from McAllen, 7 KRV. Thanks for calling, John. What's your comment?
All right. I'm just reading from a newspaper, from a Investor's Rarity, who publishes stuff by James Cook. It says the U.S. financial system today hangs in an increasing precarious position. The house of cards literally built on nothing but financial leverage, speculation, and derivatives.
Yeah.
The NASDAQ bubble deflated in 2000.
Yeah.
And we cannot keep this up. U.S. credit and debt excesses of the past few years are beyond past experience in history.
Right.
Essentially leaving a total vulnerable economic system that could lead to the financial collapse of the whole system.
Okay. Yes. I mean, we know that. The thing is, John, we know what the enemy is. The problem is not the enemy. A crook is going to be a crook. A criminal is a criminal. But where's the other side? Where is the constitutionalist? Where is our side? Who represents us? There's the problem. We can complain all we want about fascists such as Barack Obama and George Bush. But where is our side? The problem that we have is the weakness or the non-existent of the capitalist, of the individualist. And the only one in the campaign right now is Ron Paul, and he's being attacked by Republicans, by Democrats, and worst of all, he's being attacked by Fred. And, so the thing is, we have a brainwashed population that cannot see the truth. So we'll get back to this after our short commercial break. 7 at KRV Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman, home of the Iron Microphone. (710) KURV Talkback with Dr. Lawrence Gelman, home of the Iron Microphone. Scientific conservatism. Okay, when you listen to these pundits, conservative pundits, they're all really big on attacking the other side. But that's easy to do. It's easy to attack fascists and communists. to call them that. What is the deal about that? The problem is, where's our side? The problem in the government today is not that the Democrats are racist enslavers. The problem is that the other side is in the hands of the Republicans, who have no principles, no constitutional principles. And they all belong to the same club. They're just different teams within the same club. And where are those that represent the principles of the nation's founding, the ideology of the founding fathers? Whenever they appear, they are laughed at, castigated, and worse, they're often ignored. Ronald Reagan went through that and basically single-handedly became president. The only people that supported him were the American people. We now have another situation with Ron Paul. But the thing is, Ron Paul is having a more difficult time even than Ronald Reagan, because the establishment did not take Ronald Reagan seriously enough in their views. They never anticipated that he could successfully become president of the United States. Therefore, the politicians learned and came together and agreed among themselves, Democrats and Republicans, that they would never, ever allow another Ronald Reagan, another outsider, another man of the people become president of the United States. Because when that happens, all the cronyism, all the entrenched interests, all the one-worlders, they lose their status and position. And so for the Republicans, they would much prefer Barack Obama win than an independent constitutionalist such as Ron Paul. And the same thing with the Democrats. The Democrats would much prefer a Mitt Romney or another establishment Republican win than allow an outsider constitutionalist, principled individual such as Ron Paul to win. That is why so much of the media is against Ron Paul. That is why so many self-proclaimed conservatives are against Ron Paul, because they really all belong to the same elitist club. Let me give you a perfect example of the elitism in our government today. We have the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is the head of 1/3 of the government, one of the three branches of our government as defined in the Constitution: the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judiciary. The Supreme Court, consisting of 9 justices, 6 come from Harvard Law School, 3 from Yale Law School. Schools which are probably hardly more than 100 miles apart, that represent northeastern elitist, the northeastern elitist part of the country that has subverted the Constitution and denigrates and laughs at middle America, the middle America that made the country great. And so you have this is what we have. We have these elitists. And now, if you think about it, how does that happen? We have many, many law schools in this country, hundreds of law schools. Many of those law schools have individuals which are smarter than any Harvard or Yale student. So the question arises, why is it that 6 out of 9 are from Harvard Law School and 3 from Yale Law School? It's all an interconnect. They're all in it together. They belong to the same elitist club. Is when I saw at a dinner, I saw Greenspan having dinner with Tom Lehrer of PBS News. They all belong to the same little elitist clubs. They all go eat in the same places. They all meet together in congressional hallways, in the hallways of the capital of the United States. They have no connection to the American people, and worse, they have no connection to the founding principles. They don't understand the Constitution, don't bother with it because they know better. They don't understand the ideology of the country, they don't bother with it because they know better. Why do they know better? Because they've been taught that they are smarter and better than anybody else, and it is their obligation as good Americans and good managers to control the lives of all other Americans, because if Americans are allowed to control their own lives, they won't be able to manage. So much so they only these elitists from the Northeast have the intelligence and the ability to run the nation. And if you don't believe it, just ask them. Now, how do they guarantee their control? They only interview and allow like-minded individuals. So if you want to go work for Goldman Sachs, well, who works for Goldman Sachs? Robert Rubin, Harvard. Henry Paulson, all elitists. These are all elitists. Timothy Geithner, Harvard. They're all elitists. They're the only ones who get interviews. So if Goldman Sachs is looking for a new CEO, they only interview Harvard and Yale graduates or Northeastern elitist graduates. You have, and that's for all these big corporations. John Corzine, all these elitists, all these Northeastern elitists, and the rest of us, we don't even get a chance. We don't even get an opportunity. All the rest of us do is invent and discover. All the rest of us do is create the transistor, create the internet, create the light bulb. Thomas Edison did not even go to college. Steve Jobs, Michael Dell, Bill Gates did not even graduate from college. Sam Walton was fired from. He's just. I don't even know if he went to college. I think he did, but I mean, certainly no fancy dancy school. All the greatness of our society, all the great inventions, all the great discoveries came from other than your elitist class. Why? Because the elitist class can only think inside the box. It's the aristocracy with the divine right of kings that by birthright they are somehow special and different. So all the new way of thinking, and so the aristocrats, the last thing they want, the Harvards, the Yales, the Cornells, the Stanfords, they want things the way they are. It makes them nervous to think outside the box. It makes them nervous when non-elitists gain ascendancy. That is why they so much fear and hate Ron Paul, who is anything but an elitist. And so they fear him. They fear what he might do to their little regimes, to their little feudal system. They fear individuals like that. But these thoughts are nothing new. If you read the work 1984 by George Orwell, which was written in 1949, you will find many thoughts in it that indicate the way elitists thinks and the way they view the world. They fear independence. Why? What was the great fear that resulted from the American Revolutionary War? Was to the aristocratic classes of Europe that a country could actually depose a king and create a country in which the people, the common people, were the creators of the country. And the thing they feared the most was that such a country would succeed. That is why Europe and Europeans have always hated the United States. That is why our country was created by individuals fleeing from the rest of the world. An American comes from every single ethnic group, from every color, from every race. In Germany, you have a country of Germans. In Hungary, you have a country of Hungarians. In France, you have a country of Frenchmen. And they are distinctive. They have their own certain culture. They have a certain appearance. They have a certain way of presenting themselves. But the United States consists of Germans and Frenchmen and Russians and Kenyans and Englishmen and Irishmen and Chinamen and Japanese and all the rest. There is no ethnicity which is an American. What makes America what it is not ethnicity, color, or race. It is ideology. It is a thought. It is an idea. All other countries are created by ethnic groups. Our country is created by ideas. And that makes us distinct and different and also a threat to all other countries' statist manner of existing. Because statism is something that the United States is against. Statism is aristocracy, where a certain group feels that they have the power, the right to control the lives of others. That is statism. It is an offshoot of aristocracy. The aristocratic classes fear anything from the common man. And that is why Europe hates America and everything America stands for. That is why those politicians in the United States feel much more comfortable with the European aristocratic class than they do with the American common people. That is why they love each other so much. That is why Barack Obama and George Bush are so friendly with the potentates of Saudi Arabia or of Egypt or of England or France or Russia, why George Bush is much more like Putin than he is like George Washington. That is why Barack Obama is so enamored with individuals such as statists, such as Hugo Chavez, Tony Blair, Merkel, or Putin than he is with the American people. That is why Barack Obama surrounds himself so much with elitists, even elitists of the Hollywood vein. And they have nothing in common with the American people. Unfortunately, very few of our political class have anything in common with the American people. But we need to understand that there's a reason for that. And the reason is that someone who wants to become a politician already has the psychology of a politician. And what is the overriding psychology of a politician? Arrogance. Arrogance is the number one characteristic trait of all politicians. They know better, they're smarter, they deserve to control the lives of others. Arrogance, whether it's a Mitt Romney or a Newt Gingrich or a Barack Obama or a Charlie Rangel or any of them, what oozes from every pore in their body is arrogance. And that regardless of their point of view, their personal characteristic, their personality trait is one of arrogance. That is why we have a Constitution. The Constitution exists to limit the effect of that arrogance. If our founding fathers had believed that the average politician in the United States would be different than that of Europe, that the average politician of the United States would somehow be a good person who believed in the welfare of all, who believed in the principles of individual liberty and freedom, then no Constitution would have been necessary. But a Constitution was created. Why? To protect the American people from an overreaching American government. Because our founding fathers knew the characteristics and the tendencies of the average politician was to forever gain more power, more control, forever seek a society to enslave. So our founding fathers created the Constitution to constrain the government, to limit the government from its natural tendencies. So what did our politicians and government do in order to overcome the obstacles and restrictions of the Constitution? It subverted the Constitution, and it's been subverting the Constitution for a long period of time. And to show you the statist bent of those so-called conservatives who populate the government, it's this. is that everything that the statists have done to undermine the Constitution is now considered precedent and therefore cannot be touched. So when the government, when the Constitution is subverted via Supreme Court decisions and legislation that allows the government to intrude into the daily affairs of a citizen, to impose a federal tax upon citizens, to impose a progressive tax upon citizens, to impose government regulations upon the states, when the Supreme Court says that is allowable and therefore breaks the Constitution, the conservatives that go into government say, well, that's precedent that cannot be changed. And so even though it has subverted the Constitution, they leave precedent alone. The Roe v. Wade decision is anti-constitutional. Yet it is now considered precedent, so that even so-called pro-life Republicans say they do not want to overturn Roe v. Wade because of precedent, even though the precedent is non-constitutional. And you know why they don't want to overturn the precedent? Because though they call themselves conservatives, they are really no more than big government statists who believe more in big government than in the principles of liberty, freedom, and independence. They all come from the same school. They all come from the same culture. They may have slight differences of opinion, but ultimately they all agree on this one belief and philosophy, that the government needs to be in control, that the government needs to control the lives of the citizen, that the government and the people in government know more, are better, and are deserving to be in control. It is no different than the divine right of kings, which plagued Europe for hundreds of years, in which the people came to believe through indoctrination that those in the aristocracy, born into the aristocracy, were born into that position by an act of God, and therefore had a divine right to control the very lives and have the control of life and death over the average subject in a country. And that, where do you suppose that kind of thinking comes from? It comes from the recesses of the human mind. And the human mind, which believed that the king had a divine right to control the lives of the citizens of a country, that belief resides in the minds of our politicians as well. And though Barack Obama or George Bush calls himself and is referred to as president instead of king, do not believe that they perceive themselves as anything other than aristocracy, anything other than king. Do not believe that our senators and representatives, who do not call themselves dukes and counts and such, do not believe themselves to be exactly that. That is why they will not allow term limits. They believe themselves to be born into their position. They believe themselves to be the new aristocracy, born into that position with the right to control over others. In a democracy, the means to do so is indoctrination. That is why we have created the system of public education. The system of public education does not exist to educate the population. It exists to indoctrinate the population to believe that the government is benevolent and that all goods and services and all benefits and privileges derive from the government, and that everything we have is a consequence of the government. That great lie, which is taught to everyone in the United States. It is continued to be spewed out of the media after we leave the system of education on a daily basis from the news media and the information media, which continues to spew out that lie that all of our benefits come from government and that we cannot exist without government, and that government is benevolent. This is the garbage that we are indoctrinated with, that we live with, and we have come to believe because so few, such as myself, will come out and say something different. And because we adhere to constitutional principles because we believe in the ideology of the Founding Fathers, individual liberty, freedom, and independence. We believe that an individual should be in charge of their own lives and be free of the shackles placed upon him or her by government, because we believe that. To show you how far astray we are from the path of constitutional principles, we are the ones considered extremists. Ron Paul, the constitutionalist, is the one considered an extremist. It is funny, and not really so funny. It is tragic. It is tragic that the constitutionalist who adheres to the principle of the Constitution, to the ideology of the Founding Fathers, is the one that's considered to be on the extreme edge of political thought. That is how far we, as a nation, have deviated from the principles of our Founding Fathers. In the book 1984, this is what is found in that book. The choice for mankind lies between freedom and happiness, and for the great bulk of mankind, happiness is better. Freedom is insecure. It is hard. It requires responsibility and decision-making. To make a decision is hard. To accept the effects of that action, to accept the responsibility for your actions is hard. Much easier to be a slave. Much easier to be provided for. Much easier to remain forever in the womb. You don't believe people would prefer to be slaves? Look what has happened in the black culture of the United States, where 80% of the children are born out of wedlock and half of their population is on welfare. They prefer to be slaves. You don't think it's slavery to be dependent upon the government for your food, for your housing, for your clothes, and for your benefits, for your education, and for your health care? You don't think that makes you a slave? And all the government wants in return is your vote to make sure that they stay in power. And so that is what the government does. There are those who think Barack Obama is incompetent because he has destroyed the economy. Barack Obama has achieved exactly what he set out to do. Government depends upon slaves. Government depends upon those who are dependent on government. Therefore, it is in the interest of government to create as large a dependent class as possible, because it is dependency which government requires in order to maintain its power. We have Scott calling from South Padre Island. 7 on KRV. Thanks for calling, Scott. What's your comment, please?
Yes, sir. One thing you've definitely hit right on is our public school system and our public education. They pretty much treat abortion as though it's a birth control method, which it is not. And they pretty much have gotten that into everybody's head that it can be used as a birth control method when there's so many different ways of controlling birth. But, boy, they just that's one thing I've always ticked me off is they all think that abortion is birth control, and it is not.
Well,
and my other statement is that one problem we have is that there's a lot of rich people that have nonprofit charities in this country that they get a lot of money raised up for these Republican people like Mitt Romney and that. And once they're elected, they turn around and they give them so many grants and so much government money to run their nonprofit organizations. Of course, they're making money off of it, off administration fees.
Right, exactly. One hand, they contribute to Romney as they contribute to Barack Obama, and those who contribute expect something in return. Barack Obama gives money to labor unions. They give him campaign contributions. Mitt Romney has his constituency, whatever it is, and they give him, and then they return his largesse to them in the form of contributions. The birth control ideology, which is now permeated through our school system, exists to make sex a recreational event. And what that does is that it separates individuals from each other. The bond between man and woman is broken, and that is why half the children born in the United States today are born out of wedlock. Thanks for calling, Scott. Have to go to a break. 7 on KRV Talkback. Dr. Lawrence Gelman. Back after this short commercial break. 710 KURV, Talkback to Dr. Lawrence Gelman. We're back. 1-800-580-8255, 1-800-580-TALK, streaming live on KURV.com. In the book 1984, written by George Orwell in 1949, there are many things in it which many terms which we use today. The term Big Brother came from that book. Doublespeak and newspeak came from that book. And I'm going to read out just a little passage from it to give you an idea what things are all about. If you read legislation, healthcare legislation, any kind of legislation, if you bother to do the thousands and thousands of pages that are in these laws, you will find that really they don't have anything to do with the subject at hand. For example, in healthcare legislation, there's nothing about healthcare. It's all about penalties, fines, structures, hierarchies, SARS, things of, nothing about healthcare itself. Page upon how to regulate healthcare, and nothing about healthcare. And of course, if you understand that the reason that legislation is created is to enslave the people, then you understand that the healthcare legislation, reform or whatever they call it, and it's always a double-speak lie. Reform means not to reform but to corrupt. That if you read the legislation, what you find is that it exists simply to give government control over your health care, and that's all that it exists for. We have a call. Rod in Edinburgh, 710 KURV. Thanks for calling. What's your comment, please?
Oh, well, I've been hearing you for a while now.
Yeah.
And I really like your program.
Good.
And I've been wondering, do you have a podcast also?
I have a website that has my programs on it. It's drgelmanonline.com. Mm-hmm. And I have my programs are on that. And I think I have some kind of means of podcast. Actually, right now I've just hired a webmaster. Mm-hmm. I've hired so that I'm going to update. I'm going to vastly improve it. I'm going to get podcasts and also offer other things on my website. I'll have more information about that as soon as it gets set up. It's getting set up now, and so probably by the beginning of February it should be up and running. So when that happens, I'll make that announcement, and I'm going to have DVDs that are going to be available, transcripts of programs, written transcripts which will be sent out, maybe pamphlets. I'm thinking of putting together some of this stuff into a small book, and so I'm working on that right now. I've hired a couple of people and organizations to help put that together, and so I think that that we'll have all that capability within a couple of weeks. Anything else?
I just want to say that I'm a Ron Paul supporter, but I have only been a Ron Paul supporter since 2011, just last year.
Yeah.
And in 2008, I was looking at Huckabee and Mitt Romney, but I didn't know too much about them. And when it came to McCain, I was like, I have to hold my nose because I didn't really like McCain, but sure. I was like, I have to. And the only person that really was motivating me was like Sarah Palin, right?
Right.
And this time around, I looked around, and the only person that has a real plan and that like people like Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity, like I've been listening to them for a long time, but just hearing them, like they've been saying, we need to cut with real spending cuts and not these imaginary cuts, and when somebody actually comes along and says, hey, I have a plan, and all of a sudden they're just like putting down Ron Paul for his plans.
Right. That was really kind of a shock to me, a shock to the system, and I agree with you entirely. I used to be an avid listener to Rush Limbaugh and a little bit to Sean Penn and Mark Levin.
Yeah,
and
Mark
they all
Levin
came out
also
attacking Ron Paul, and the masquerade was over.
Yeah,
you could see that they don't have true convictions. They're self-serving hypocrites. They're not real conservatives. And it's just as you said, as soon as someone comes along who really wants to do something about what's going on in a constitutional manner, they attack him. They attack him more than they attack Barack Obama. So they're all belong to the same club. They're all part of the same system. They're all elitists that, if you just watch their programs, they all hang out with the same people that supposedly they rail against. Anything else?
Well, I also looked at his foreign policy, and I actually went to research it.
Yeah.
You know, he talks about how we been all over the Muslim world, and we've for example, I didn't know this until I went online and found out about in 1952 or in 53. There was a constitutional monarchy in Iran, and see, the Shah was there, but he didn't really have that much power. It was a parliament, and the CIA was sent over there to overthrow the parliament, which gave power later on to the Shah. And that led to 1979, where the Shah was overthrown by the people, but the Irani Islamic government took over, and that made things worse.
Right, exactly. We just don't have the capability to be able to dictate the proper way of doing things. Most of the things that we do end up backfiring on us. And the bottom line is that our politicians are really no better than any of the politicians anywhere else. So they don't mind handing over Eastern Europe to Stalin, and they don't mind handing over the Chinese to Mao. They don't mind handing over Cuba to Castro. They don't mind handing over Iran to the Muslim theocracy. Mm-hmm. And so it's because they're all the same. I mean, these people are all the same. They all think they're better than us. They all think, Barack Obama and George Bush, they think they're better than us. They think they're smarter. They think we're not bright enough to run our own lives. And that's the way Putin thinks, and that's the way Merkel thinks, and that's the way Sarkozy thinks. That's the way Mao thought, and Stalin thought, and Putin thinks, and all of that. That's the way Hugo Chavez thinks. That's the way Castro thinks. And they all think the same way.
And I can also keep going on the Latin America. Like, I've been hearing Hugo Chavez, he said the imperialist USA, and it's like, why is he saying that? And then I go and look at the Banana Wars, and the Banana Wars go from 1898 to the Depression, and you find out that America was over there, Nicaragua in 1912 to 1932, and protecting the American business interests.
Right, sure.
And it's like, wow, it opens your eyes. I know the American people are good people, but it's the government that's going the wrong way.
That's it. You hit it right on the head. The American people are good people. We're freedom-loving people, but we've been hijacked by a fascist government. So thanks for your call. I appreciate it. So every government tries to present itself as being a benefit to the people, and every government tries to defend its reason for existence. And one of the main ways it does that is by creating enemies. And so by creating an enemy, it makes the people of a country believe that they need the government to protect them from the enemy, and the enemy was created by the government itself. And so it turns out in reality that the only reason you need government is to protect you from other governments. And so in the book 1984, I was going to say, I'll just read a little excerpt of it to give you an idea that there are people out there who do understand reality. And in the book, this is what is found. Let me see here. We know, this is from the book, we know that no one ever seizes power with the intention of relinquishing it. Power is not a means, it is an end. One does not establish a dictatorship in order to safeguard a revolution. The object of persecution is persecution. The object of torture is torture. The object of power is power. Now you begin to understand me. In the book 1984, it comes the famous doublespeak: war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. And so it gives you an outline of the psychology of those in power, why they are in power, and what is the purpose of government in fact, which is to give power to an aristocratic few to dominate the majority, and then to create some kind of system of indoctrination to convince the people that they need that government. And, of course, all those who resist are eliminated. We have Domingo calling from Mission. 79 KRV Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman. Thanks for calling, Domingo. What's your comment?
Yeah, my question is outside of politics and outside of presidential candidates.
Yeah.
The state of New York has passed a law where youngsters, children, will be taught bestiality and homosexuality and lesbianism. And I was wondering if Mr. Sandusky of Penn State alleges to have touched the leg of a little boy, and he is arrested, and it's a tremendous scandal. How big of a scandal would it be when they destroy 2 million children with their brain?
Right. Well, that is what government does. The definition of perversion. The definition of perversion is when something is used other than its intended purpose. And so, therefore, homosexual sexual behavior is perverted. I'm not saying that they ought to be persecuted or anything, but the bottom line is it's a perversion because what they're doing is using the sexual apparatus in a way that it was not meant to be. What is the purpose of sex? The purpose of sex and intercourse is the procreation of the species, of prolongation of the species, continuation of the species. And so the purpose of government is to pervert the morals of a nation, which allows the government to stay in power. And so if the government says that these things are all acceptable, if they're all acceptable, it undermines morality. And through the undermining of morality, government maintains power because the government disseminates that kind of indoctrination, of that kind of propaganda. And that is why the government does it. It is not that the government in and of itself cares one way or the other about that type of behavior. It's just that by undermining the morality of the nation, it strengthens the government. Now, your point is also very well taken in that how is it that behavior that is by that Sandusky, the coach in Penn State, that exact type of behavior is freely disseminated throughout the media, in television programs, in movies, and those people not only are not punished, they are actually rewarded. So you have this selectivity here, which is kind of interesting, where you have the government promoting bestiality, homosexual behavior, pedophilia, and then prosecuting those who actually at times. So it is a confusion, and I can understand how like yourself, you and me wonder why is it punished on one hand and promoted on another. And I think the underlying the whole thing is the government's attempt to undermine the morals of the nation. Of course, the best way to do that is when you're young, by making it seem that these abnormal, perverted behaviors are actually a normal variant. And so in that way, the nation remains confused, the morality is undermined, and when you do that, you make the government more powerful. So ultimately, what the government does is to figure out ways to stay in power and to augment its power over people. And by this kind of moral confusion, it helps to achieve that goal. That's why that's why you see these things which apparently are contradictory. But as you are confused and I am confused, so is the rest of the nation. And when the nation is confused and diverted from the real problem, which is the government is the real problem, that allows the government to stay in power. Anything else?
Yeah.
That's
well,
it?
no, that's
Yeah?
what I wanted to say.
Okay.
Is, 5 years from now, when these kids are 18, 19, can
Yeah.
the parents sue
Yeah.
the state of New York just like the parents or the government is suing Mr. Sandusky because their kids will be technically molested in their brain? That would be the issue there.
Well, that's a good idea, but it's almost impossible to sue the government because you take the government to government courts. So when you sue the government, you're in a court that is owned by the government. I don't think the regular citizen has much of a chance of overcoming that system. Well, thanks for your call. I appreciate it. So now we have Jack calling from McAllen, 7 on KRV, Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman. Okay, Jack, what's on your mind today?
Well, what's on my mind, I was just told by the call screener not to talk bad about anyone at the KURV radio. So
forget about Fred. He doesn't like Ron Paul. I think we can toss anything that he says out the window.
Okay. In any event, I have in front of me a Federal Reserve note, a $20 Federal Reserve note.
Yeah.
And there's a picture of Andrew Jackson. And he spent his career as president trying to get these central bankers out of this country, to get these.
Right. He refused to allow the recertification of the central bank.
Right, because basically it was an international bank, and it's a lot of outside influence.
Just like now.
Now, in 1913, however, various groups and individuals with a lot of power and a lot of money managed to get past the Federal Reserve Act of 1913.
Yeah.
And your discussion of Ron Paul and the Federal Reserve Corporation is very enlightening. And I suddenly realized, of course, this is how they finance themselves, regardless of what the American people want one way or another.
Exactly right. It bypasses the will of the American people.
The Federal Reserve Corporation becomes, in effect, a slush fund for the power brokers.
Yeah.
In the U.S. federal government.
That's why it's there.
They can just reach their hand in there, and I'm sure they were laughing when they put Andrew Jackson's picture right here on this $20 bill. This is disgusting. And Ron Paul is our man. One more thing about Ron Paul, Dr. Gelman.
Yeah.
What's been going on? And I was one of the people when I was a teenager. I went into the Marines, but Ron Paul wants to stop this needless slaughter of American young men by sending them over to foreign countries to get involved with foreign concerns for no reason except to aggrandize and fill the pocketbooks of the people in power, whether they're in government or out of government, big business, big money interests. And I think young people are beginning to understand Ron Paul will keep young people from getting butchered, out there, on battlefields for no reason except for the big money interest, big power, big government interest.
Well,
anyway,
it's a crying shame that middle American children are sent to Iraq to be killed in order to save Kuwait for its Sharia law Muslim fundamentalists that run that country. It's blasphemy is what that is. And that's what we have. I don't know, what is it now? 6,000 Americans or so have been killed. 6,000 Americans have been killed propping up Sharia law in the Middle East.
And tens of thousands wounded, mutilated, blinded.
Maimed for life. 18 and 20 and 25-year-old men and women, Americans, maimed for life so that George Bush can hold the hand of the Sheikh of Arabia, so that Barack Obama can prostrate himself prostrate himself before the Sheikh of Saudi Arabia. That's all it's about. It's only about that. And and of course, for us to be willing to do that, they have to convince the American people that it is somehow in our interest. It is just amazing to me that we have Ron Paul sticking with constitutional principles that says we should not be involved overseas, undermining our economy by bailing out Europe and sending our young men and women to die for dictators, and that he's the one that's considered an extremist. I noticed the polls in South Carolina, they're always doing this. The media and the government is so desperate to undermine Ron Paul that haven't you ever noticed that every time Ron Paul, and he goes in, that Ron Paul never wins a poll except when the American people vote. And every time they vote, he always does better than anticipated. The thing is, if the American people would understand that the media is in cahoots with the government to maintain a status culture and that they lie, what they try to do is convince the American people, and others that do that are Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, and Mark Levin, and all these other phony conservatives that we at one time may have trusted, but no longer, for those of us that the veil has fallen and the charade is over and the emperor has no clothes. Then
young people are waking up to what's going on.
Yeah, I just wish that the Tea Party and the seniors would understand that as well. Okay, thanks, Jack, for calling. Now we have Cynthia in Edinburgh, 7 at KRV. Thanks for calling, Cynthia. What's your comment, please?
Well, my comment was about the middle American kids that are sent over to fight for their country.
Yes.
Mitt Romney has 5 sons. Not one of them has served in the military.
Well, yeah, I mean, they look. It's the same reason that Romney and Barack Obama and George Bush and Bill Clinton don't send their children to private school to public schools. They send them to private schools, okay? Because they know the truth. They know that what they're trying to do with the military is not to preserve the American way of life. It's to benefit special interests. Mitt Romney, if it was really to protect American interests, then he would have his children in the military. But he understands what the rest of us are lied to about. He understands that the real reason is to protect special interests. He's not going to sacrifice his children on an altar of political expediency, but he's perfectly willing to sacrifice the children of others. And so that is what the American people need to come to realize. It's not a question of cowardice. It's a question of what the real agenda and the real goal is for these politicians. Sorry, I have to go to a break here. You can hang on or call back if you want, but 710 KRB, Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman, back after a short break. (710) KRV Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman, 1-800-580-8255, 1-800-580-TALK, streaming live on KURV.com. Our politicians are in charge of the public school system, yet they send their children to private schools. Why should that be? It is because they know exactly what the public school system is, and it is not there to educate children. It is there to indoctrinate them, to make sure that they're illiterate, to make sure they're uneducated, and to make sure that they will be dependent upon government. I mentioned before, but forgot to follow up on, that Barack Obama is achieving exactly what he wanted to achieve. He wants to achieve a country full of unemployed, semi-literate, illiterate, unskilled individuals dependent upon government. He then bails out or gives money to those rich executives in AIG, Goldman Sachs. He bails out and gives money to the unions of General Motors and Chrysler. And he does all that intentionally to undermine the independent sector of society and to strengthen the dependent sector of society. He then gets monies from the unions, from the rich executives of AIG, General Electric, Goldman Sachs, Merrill Lynch, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and all the other entities, the school districts and all that he bailed out, specifically understanding and knowing full well that he will then get money back contributed to him from those entities. So Barack Obama is achieving exactly what he wants to achieve. He wants to achieve a lot of unemployment, a lot of illiteracy, a lot of dependency. One other thing I was looking at the employment statistics. They're touting this decrease of unemployment to 8.5%. It is all lies and nonsense. If you look at the last 13 months from government statistics alone, what do you find? You find that 1.7 million more Americans have entered the potential job market, but only 1.5 million jobs were created in the last 13 months, which should mean that there's 200,000 more unemployed people than before, which would mean that using those numbers as they're meant to be used, the unemployment rate has not really gone down to 8.5%, but has gone up to 10%. Why do they say 8.5%? Because many of the 1.7 million that entered the job market are college graduates and never had a job. And since they do not get a job and never lost a job, they are not counted in the unemployed. Furthermore, there are hundreds of thousands of Americans which have stopped looking for jobs. They are no longer counted in the unemployed. And there are hundreds of thousands of Americans who have lost their unemployment benefits and therefore are not counted as the unemployed. The fact of the matter is there are less Americans employed today than in 2007. And this is, remember, all government statistics, not from some think tank or agency. This is the government statistics. That is the reality of the situation. But look at the way the media lies to you. Now, there's the Twinkie company, Hostess, has declared bankruptcy. And those idiots on Fox News and CNN make a big joke about it, but the Twinkies and all that, and never tell you the real reason they're bankrupt. And the real reason that they're bankrupt is because of the unions. The unions have bankrupted Hostess through their overly generous pension programs and the theft from the pensions. The reason that Hostess is bankrupt is they can no longer fund the union pension plans because they're so outrageously managed and require such outrageous amounts of money. But you'll never hear that in the media. The union. I remember my gosh, when I was a kid, I used to eat those Twinkies and those cupcakes and all the other stuff that they make. They're bankrupt not because of mismanagement, but because of the unions, and you'll never hear that in the media. Now we have Joseph calling from FAR, 710 KRV Talkback. Thanks for calling, Joseph. What's your comment, please?
Good morning, Dr. Gelman. It's a
Morning.
pleasure to speak with you again.
Thanks.
And I just want to thank you for all that you're doing in the community. I was delighted to get on the University of Texas Pan American website the other day and see that you got a new program going on out there, constitutional studies. I think that's going to be real good for the community.
So we hope.
What I wanted to say was, my comment is this, and I hope I can be able to articulate this correctly. And I'm not trying to, in any way, shape, or form, trap you in any type of supposed contradiction. I'm just wanting to kind of get your thinking on this, and because I know I deal with it myself. How would you see? Because I know we both agree. We both make the comments that government has far outreached itself, and as far as it's too big. But if government was completely out of the healthcare system, and I know, you being a doctor and the CEO of a hospital, a lot of, I'm sure you get income, by government programs that are, in other words, people go into the hospital, can't pay, and you get paid something from the government to be able to help those people. So how would you see the healthcare system if the government completely, totally got out of it? And what would the effect be in the short term and then also in the long term. We can just kind of elaborate on that.
Well, remember, the money that the government gives to providers through the Medicare and Medicaid and other programs comes from somewhere. It has to come from somewhere. And so therefore it is removed from the productive members of society and given to the government. Now, you would have to have a disconnect from reality to believe that those in government could manage the healthcare dollar better than those who are involved in the healthcare system, such as physicians or those who manage hospitals. But now, when the government gets money, they are under many influences, and so what happens with the healthcare dollar is so much of it is wasted, and that is the biggest problem with the healthcare system, the way it is today in the United States. Is not that there isn't enough money, is that so much of it is wasted. Now, I understand what you're getting at with your concern. You would say, well, if it wasn't for the government with Medicare and Medicaid and things like that, what would happen to the elderly? What would happen to the poor? What would happen to the children? But the thing is, the money is still there. The money is still there. But if the government, so you're saying, you make it sound like that doctors are heartless, and that if it wasn't for the government paying the doctor would not care for the individual. But what happened before Medicare and Medicaid? Doctors and charities did take care of people who didn't have any money at all. And it was the doctors and the hospitals and that created all the new technology, which allows Americans to live longer and better. And so the question really, the real nexus of it, the real crux of it is this. Do you believe that government has a bigger heart, is more charitable, is more honest than the average individual? If you believe, well, there it is. If you have to have faith in the individual. You have to have and because I have faith that a doctor when confronted with a patient that has no money will take care of that patient. It doesn't matter if it's going to get paid or not. And doctors will do that and hospitals will do that without the government forcing them to do that. The problem is that government benefits a small clique of very rich individuals in the pharmaceutical companies and durable medical equipment companies to make sure that they get huge sums of money. Now, we've all heard of the $10 aspirin. Now, maybe the $10 aspirin doesn't exist, but the $1,500 screw does, and I know that for a fact. So let me ask you this: I could show you, like someone with a back operation that needs to have a structure put in to support the back because it's compressing the nerve, and so they put in a little plate and some screws and something like that. That little plate, and if I showed you the plate, you said, that looks like something I can buy at Home Depot or Lowe's, and I would show you those screws, and you say, my gosh, I've seen screws like that. I can go to Home Depot. And what does it cost at Home Depot or Lowe's? It costs a nickel, a dime. But when it's sold to us by a manufacturer, it costs $1,500 for one screw and $3,000 for that plate, $9,000. Now, if you have a back problem and I came to you as a surgeon, I said, this is going to cost you $9,000 for this stuff. You say, no, wait a second, doctor. I'm going to go down to Home Depot and Lowe's, and I'm going to buy that for 30 cents. But the government won't allow you to do that. I have a friend who manufactures stents in Colombia. Those stents in Colombia cost $250. In the United States, they cost $2,500. They are exactly the same. You know why I cannot go to Colombia and buy those stents? You know why? Because the FDA here will not approve it. And so I have to use – so what the government does, it creates a system of waste and inefficiencies that make everything so much more expensive. If you wonder why when you go to a hospital, why it costs $25,000 or $30,000 for a back operation or $25,000 to have an artificial knee put in, it is not because of the doctor, because the doctor gets $1,000. It is not because of the hospital. The hospital charges you $25,000, but it costs the hospital $20,000 to buy that junk from the manufacturer. And you know why that is? Because the government creates a system that allows that to happen. So that is why yes.
Well, I was going to say my own personal experience with that, Dr. Gelman, is I'm probably like lower middle class. My personal financial status right now.
Yeah.
And about 2 years ago, I had a hernia, an inguinal hernia, and I don't have health insurance with my employer, but I did have some savings. And here in the States, it was going to cost me anywhere between $5,000 and $10,000 to get that inguinal hernia repaired.
Yeah.
I just didn't have that money, and I didn't want to have the American taxpayer pay for my surgery. So I went to Mexico, and I got it done for approximately $1,700, and they did a good job. They did a fair job.
Okay.
And I stayed in the hospital for a day, and I got that surgery done. And but my thing is the reason why I ask you that, and I hope you don't get the wrong idea, was like I said at the beginning, I wasn't trying to put you in a supposed contradiction, because as being a doctor, I know that you get money from the government to help people, but like I see, I wonder about those things myself. Because like sometimes, like when I'm in school, like going to UTPA, like myself. I couldn't support my family and go to school at the same time and pay their tuition. So, I do get help from tuition, but at the same time, like I think to myself, and I wonder, like, in my heart, I'm conservative, but I'm accepting these government funds to go to school, and that's why, like, I see a contradiction there, and I'm just wanting to kind of get your take on it and see, what.
Well, let me tell you.
How do you resolve these things?
Let me tell you how corrupt the government is. You had a hernia, and you went to Mexico for $1,700. In the United States, if you were on Medicaid, the government would have given the hospital $600 and the surgeon $200 and the anesthesiologist $100. What does that add up to? It adds up to $1,000. If you had come to the United States and gone to the administration at our hospital, we would have done that operation all-inclusive for $1,700 or less. But that is how the government skews everything. The doctors, I'm going to tell you a little something. The doctors in Mexico make more per case than in the United States. And the whole system of the United States has been corrupted. But why is it that in the United States, a hospital gets $600 and a doctor $200 and anesthesia $100 for an operation that actually costs more in Mexico? Why do they do that in the United States? Because so much of the healthcare dollar is stolen in the United States. The average Medicaid beneficiary in the United States costs $10,000 a year per person, $10,000. Yet, look at the reimbursement. Where's the money going? It's all being siphoned off to the rich friends, cronies, relatives, family members, and contributors to politicians who shift that money to somewhere else. So that is the problem in the United States, is the government has skewed the system to such a degree that situations like yours occur. And the thing is that so many Americans are just not aware of the reality. So much of the money that you earn is stolen by the government in the form of Social Security payments and Medicare payments, which if with your job you have to pay, in your income tax and all the other stuff that the government takes from you. That is one of the problems that we have. The government takes away so much money from the average citizen that the average citizen can't afford to get a private education. The average citizen can't afford to buy health care insurance. The average citizen can't do so many things because the government gets you in two ways. It steals so much from you and makes things so expensive that it makes it hard to provide the services. It is the government that makes health care so expensive so that people can't afford to get health care, and the government takes away so much of your money is the reason that you don't have the funds to pay for all these services.
So then you don't think it's in any way, shape, or form it has to do, like, for example, health providers or health insurance or insurance companies. It's more of the government and their influence in these things that are rising up these costs.
Absolutely. It is the government regulations upon the insurance companies, and I'm no fan of insurance companies, don't get me wrong. But the fact of the matter is that private insurance actually costs less than what the government collects for Medicare and Medicaid, and government insurance pays less than private insurance. Now, insurance would be a lot less expensive if the government didn't force regulations upon the insurance company, which forced them to cover things which should not have to be covered, which should be taken care of on an individual basis. So in every little component of healthcare you want to look at, whether it's regulations on private insurance companies, the artificial increase in costs that are forced upon hospitals and doctors, the added expense, the added regulations, which makes things more expensive, all of those things added up together add huge amount of unnecessary costs to healthcare, but it's done purposefully by the government, for one thing, to give power to the government, and it's done purposely by the government to benefit a small number of rich individuals. That should be no surprise to anybody that politicians are out there benefiting their friends and relatives and cronies and contributors to the expense to the detriment of the rest of us. Thanks for your call. Let me just take another call here. This is Elio in McAllen, 7 KRV Talkback. Thanks for calling. What's your comment, Elio?
Good afternoon, Doctor. Doctor, I'm not a consistent listener to your program, so I don't know if we've already covered this. But have you seen a documentary film called Brzezinski?
Yes. Yes,
about
I have.
Dr. Stanislav Brzezinski.
Yeah.
If there was there ever a more stunning indictment of the malevolent nature of government than that film, and what they did to this poor physician that only tried to help people?
Well, yeah. Well, let me tell you something. That was a great documentary, and you're exactly right. The corruption within the government, and also not just the government, but through some of these large corporations which depend upon government to feed them. But let me give you something closer to home. We have a physician-owned facility here that because of its success is being attacked simply because of that. We provide a service more efficiently and less costly than these large corporate hospitals. And by doing so, these large corporate hospitals in the region and their profitability was going down, okay? And because of that, they went to the government and paid off politicians to create a law which prevented any more physician-owned facilities from being created. And here it is right at home, but it's amazing how people get indoctrinated, because what they do is, in that case, they make people believe that this is a dangerous individual who's producing a medication which is either non-effective or dangerous to take, and they create this propaganda to make people believe the government is doing its job by going after individuals like that. And of course, the reality comes out in a documentary that the government is just self-serving, protecting some large corporations and protecting a certain industry. But let me tell you, the same thing has happened right here at home. The government, pretending to benefit the population, saying doctors can't be trusted in running hospitals. Oh, no, a doctor can be trusted with your life, just not with your wallet, apparently. And so they created in the legislation, the big corporations paid off politicians, and that's exactly what they did. Big corporations paid off the politicians to pass a law saying that if you're a mobster, a drug dealer, a taxi cab driver, or a lawyer, you can own a hospital. And the only people that cannot own hospitals in the United States, the only people are doctors. Does that make any sense? Of course not.
That's under Obamacare, is it not, that
yes,
provision?
Yes, but of course the Republicans were behind it also, but that's true. That is in Obamacare. That is one of the stipulations in Obamacare, that anybody can own a hospital except a doctor. Don't you find that
let me tell you about anybody, because I'm not going to mention any names here, but there's a large healthcare corporation which operates here in the Valley and in other places too, and they would like to acquire more facilities. But what people don't know about them is that the federal government caught them overcharging $50 million, and their penalty, there was no criminal penalties involved. They just had to pay back $27.5, and now that's our money. I don't think that's a very good deal, even from a prosecutor's point of view.
You have to understand that the owner of that corporation, Alan Miller, I'm not afraid to mention names, played golf routinely with Arlen Specter. Senator Arlen Specter. Those guys are all, I'm sure that had no effect on Arlen Specter's legislation. That Arlen Specter from Pennsylvania.
All too well do I know Arlen Specter.
Okay, he was for 30 years or whatever. He was senator from over there, and he's in the back pocket of Alan Miller, and who in out there in Pennsylvania. So these big corporations, and what about Frisch? Frisch's son was a senator from Tennessee. That is the founder of HCA Corporation, the other big corporation that is involved in healthcare for the profit only. These big corporations garner huge sums of money, and they do not tolerate competition. And so you're exactly right. I mean, sometimes there are individuals out there, and they find this malfeasance being done, but the amount of money that they make from government largesse so vastly exceeds whatever small penalties they have that they don't care if they're doing that stuff, because even if they get caught doing something, they've made so much money from doing what they're doing that they don't mind the relatively small amount of penalties that they pay, as you have alluded to. Our government pretends to fight for David, but really is backing Goliath, and that's healthcare, energy industry. It really doesn't matter. That's what government does. If people wanted to do that naturally, you wouldn't need the government to be giving these people money. I mean, no one forces you to buy an Apple computer or a cell phone or something like that. You do that out of your own volition. But when you go to a hospital and you have to pay for a pacemaker or an implant, you don't have an option. No one allows you to barter or to negotiate. That is completely out of your hands, and the reason that is because when you go to a store to buy a computer or something, you price check, right? You negotiate, you barter. You say, well, what's on discount? Can I get a discount for this, or can I get a better price for that? But you can't do that, really, with the pacemaker or the hip implant guys, because they're protected by the government with guaranteed payments. And that's not an accident. That's not an accident.
Can I comment on something, Doctor?
Yeah, go ahead.
For those of your listeners who have not seen this documentary, Brzezinski, the federal government spent $60 million trying to, I say, persecute rather than prosecute this man who cured many people, and those people testified in his behalf. These are people that had brain tumors. And I have never seen a more egregious case of travesty of justice. The only one I could think of worse was the Dreyfus affair in France. They persecuted an individual only to show that they were the government and they could do whatever they pleased.
Well, the government needs to set examples. The last thing the government wants is for any individuals or any independent organizations to be in competition with the government or with the friends of government. So many of these so-called private corporations are really just tied to the government welfare program. And you're exactly right. Woe to that organization or individual that dares cross a government-sponsored corporation or some other government-sponsored program, because they will unleash the entire government to go after you, and not only to destroy that individual, but to give an example to everybody else who dares think that they can cross a government or a government-favored corporation. Thanks for calling. We're out of time. 710 KRV Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman. Appreciate the calls. Hope you've learned something. Take a look at Ron Paul. Read his books. If you listen to what Ron Paul says and read what Ron Paul has written and ignore the nonsense coming out of the media, especially from so-called conservative pundits, I think you'll find that Ron Paul more closely adheres to your inner beliefs than Mitt Romney does, or Barack Obama, or George Bush, or anybody else. Thanks for listening. 7 and KRV. Be back next week.